Okay, so then if we're good with the syllabus issues, then we could always come back to it if we need to. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to today's topic. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay. So there was a mention in the first couple chapters of the ethical life. There was mention of the experience machine. And so I'm going to actually use the experience machine as a uniting topic for the first few chapters, okay, from the ethical life, my discussion of it. In part because I think it's something that's easy to wrap your mind around, and it's also maybe intrinsically cool topic to think about. So the experience machine case, we've got Robert Nozick here. There he is. He's saying what's up to all of us. He passed away in 2002. He was a professor at Harvard University, right? And is famous for some really cool thought experiments. The most famous one he probably developed was this one involving the experience machine. So here's a thought experiment. So imagine you could hook up to a supercomputer with the power to generate countless experiences of your choosing. So supercomputer basically has a vast database, and there are ways in which we could connect up to the supercomputer by having maybe electrodes connected to our heads from the computer and choose from the smorgasbord of options, the experiences, and enjoy them if we wanted to. So imagine technology so advanced that you could hook up to this machine for years at a time, even. So Nozick, when he originally developed the thought experiment, he says, 2 years, 5 years, but you could imagine like hooking up to such a machine for the rest of your life. Setting aside the issues of like what's going to keep you, biologically alive. You might imagine technology being so advanced to where you're hooked up to also the relevant nutrients that would keep you alive. Also set aside like who's going to run that. Maybe we have technology sophisticated enough to where you just need to pre-program everything and everybody hook up to the machine and go from there. So the question arises, like, what experiences would you choose if you could, right? Supposing like these are the electrodes that hook up, to the supercomputer, that downloading basically these experiences that you could have. You could choose any enjoyable experience you like from a vast database of experiences. Presumably, you'd want to choose the enjoyable ones. Select the most pleasant experiences for 2 to 5 years. This is kind of like an ad, doesn't it? But here's the only catch: the experiences, they're virtual. Okay, so they're not. You're having experiences, but they're not connected to connection with the real world, other than being connected to this man-made or human-made reality, the supercomputer. So the question is, would you hook up? Supposing it's for this lengthy period of 2 to 5 years, or do you even think about it for the rest of your life? Okay. Now, when Nozick ran this thought experiment, he was pretty sure that the most common reaction was going to be no. Right? The most common response to hooking up to the "would you hook up" question is going to be no. So there's an immediate kind of like resistance to hooking up to the experience machine, as he called it. Okay, no doubt some of that was based on some polling of his students at Harvard and maybe some of his colleagues. Oh, there's some examples here. I'm kind of betraying sort of my favorite sports team here. Probably alienating myself from 2/3 of my audience right now, but you can go to your favorite sporting event or two, watch some cool home runs and some great home run robberies, and there you are floating in a tank with your brain hooked up to an experience machine. Okay. Like these things obviously actually happen, but just imagine, you were to select from the database that provided you with these virtual experiences of going to these sporting events, these exciting sporting events, or perhaps you program the experience machine to where you're going to have the virtual experience of climbing Everest. Okay. The thing is what Nozick wants to assume is that it would feel the same from the inside as if you were really doing it. So even though it's virtual, it feels genuine, it feels real from the inside. It's sort of something he's willing to assume for argument's sake. Right? There are some who'd want to respond and say it wouldn't feel the same, it couldn't feel the same, et cetera, et cetera. But what Nozick's banking on is something like, well, imagine we're considering advanced technology, right? Advanced AI technology to where they could make it feel just as real as if you were actually doing it. Okay. Sometimes just in beach time, maybe you see the sun shining here at the beach, being right back in, the Northeast right now, that might look pretty pleasant. Okay, so keep in mind we have the distinction between these two different kinds of experiences, the virtual ones, the AI-driven experiences, and then veridical experiences, we call them. So two different kinds of experiences that start with V. The veridical, these have essential connections to reality, and the virtual experiences are purely simulated experiences. So the experience machine is going to give us the virtual experiences only, and not the veridical ones. Okay, so it's just an important distinction to have in mind. They're both experiences, though, nonetheless. Okay, so Nozick, he developed the experience machine, the thought experiment, in order to test theories of well-being, theories of like what's good for us. Okay, maintaining that experiences are all that matter, again, to our well-being. So this on this slide, this discussion of well-beings is important because we talk about well-being, we're talking about like what's good for us, what benefits us, right, as human beings. Well, the important word there, the important ethical word there is good, right? What's good for us? As I've tried to anticipate, when you think about ethics, 4 essential concepts should be or should come to mind: right and wrong, and good and bad. And last week, we focused on the trolleyology. That was sort of our introduction to ethics. And there I'm introducing ethics. I really wanted you to think about normative ethics, theories of rightness or wrongness, just to get you thinking about normative theory in ethics. And so we learned about utilitarianism. Remember, that's a prominent ethical theory, a prominent normative ethical theory, a theory that tells us what actions are right, which actions are wrong. It's a kind of consequentialist ethical theory as utilitarianism is, right? And then we talked about the Kantian view, which gave us the formula of humanity. Talked about the formula of humanity. Remember the context of thinking about the solution to the trolley problem. And then we tested the formula of humanity using the loop case following Thompson. But we were doing, by and large, normative ethics there. We're concerned with right action, wrong action, conversely. And so, just as by way of a bit of a reminder here. So, drop it down a little bit. Go to my whiteboard. I'm doing normative ethics, focusing on rightness, wrongness, consequentialism featured, because we talked about utilitarianism, the theory that says promote the happiness of all. And so the right thing to do, the morally right thing to do in any situation is to promote the happiness of all, or maximize happiness of all, as traditional utilitarian theories would have it. Okay, then we also talk about an anti-consequentialist view, the Kantian view. And remember, the relevant principle from the Kantian ethical theory was a formula of humanity, right? It's necessary that we always treat humanity as an end in itself, as having priceless value, as opposed to treating humanity as a mere means. We're never, it's necessarily wrong to treat human beings as mere instruments for our purposes. We treat them as if they have the value of a mere instrument, as a mere tool, a mere thing, mere object. Right? Even if doing so, even if treating someone as a mere means would bring about the happiness of all, even if it would maximize the happiness of all, we still can't treat someone as a mere means. You see how that would make the Kantian view anti-consequentialist. Okay. So trolleyology was kind of like an initial way of introducing you to this significant part of an ethical theory, normative ethics. Okay. The experience machine, on the other hand, is designed to be the way in which I'm introducing value theory, that other part of an ethical theory that I've mentioned that's really significant to it. Well, one of the other parts, or four parts, four aspects to an ethical theory, if you remember, but the value theory was a significant one. Well, when one works out a value theory, a theory of what's good, a theory of what's bad, they work out a theory of well-being, at the very least within their theory of value. So theory of value, remember, is a theory of goodness and badness. The theory of well-being is what's good and bad. And there's important qualification for us, right? So there can be what's good, what's bad, full stop, and then there can be what's good, what's bad for us. And not everything that is good or bad, full stop, is good or bad for us. At least not essentially. There are some theories where there will be perfect overlap between those things, but we haven't got there yet. So let me just continue doing some introducing. So I've introduced a bit this experience machine thought experiment, just to kind of set things up initially. You've got the thoughts here in your mind. It's easy to remember. Now let's do a little bit of a detour. I want to just set up some value theory. And then within a value theory, we're going to learn about a theory of well-being. So what is value theory? It's a theory of intrinsic goodness and intrinsic badness. So here I'm introducing this idea of intrinsic. So far I've been talking about there's goodness and badness, but typically when philosophers work out value theories, they're interested in this. They're interested in not just goodness and badness, full stop. They're interested in intrinsic goodness and badness. Okay, so just to try to offer quality definitions of what intrinsic goodness is, on this side I have noted something's intrinsically good when or if it does not derive its goodness from any external source. When it's good by its very nature, and when it's good for its own sake. Okay, so when we start thinking about, goodness, reflecting carefully, right, on goodness, it seems as if there's just different kinds of good things. There's some things that we want to say that are just good just by their very nature, and other things that are good because they're related to those things that are good by their very nature. Perhaps because those things, they're instrumental in bringing about those things that are intrinsically good or good by their very nature. This is abstract, but I'll get to an example on this slide. So the candidate things in the history of philosophy and history of ethics that have been laid out as counting as intrinsically good: happiness, pleasure, desire satisfaction or desire fulfillment. So the first two chapters of the ethical life, of the fundamentals of ethics. Roche from Landau has another book called The Ethical Life that's a companion to this one. But in the fundamentals of ethics, it's focused on happiness and pleasure. And then the next two chapters are focused on desire satisfaction theory, desire theories of value, of well-being. But happiness, pleasure, desire satisfaction, desire fulfillment, virtue, autonomy, friendship, knowledge, justice, etc. These things have all been identified by some theorists or other or others in the history of philosophy as counting as intrinsically good. It's good for their own sake, or counting as by their very nature good. And then the opposites of these above good things, intrinsically good things, would count as intrinsically bad things. So unhappiness, pain, or displeasure, desire, frustration, vice or viciousness, lacking freedom, or being controlled, um, being a loner, lacking friends, ignorance, injustice, etc. So once you figure out, in your theory, what counts as intrinsically good, it's easy to identify the things that are going to count as intrinsically bad. They're just going to be the opposites. So those things that aren't by their very nature good, but we want to say are still good, are called extrinsic goods. Okay. So when you think about intrinsic, think about the in intrinsic. The good is internal or inside of the thing itself. When you think about extrinsic goods, the goodness comes from something external to it. So that might be a helpful way of just remembering these two different kinds of good things. So extrinsic goods derive their goodness from external sources, and ultimately from those things that are intrinsically good. This is just one way of initially understanding what it means for something to count as intrinsically good. These goods aren't in themselves good. They're not good for their own sake. They're not good by their very nature, et cetera, et cetera. The classic example of something that's extrinsically good would be money. So money is not the kind of thing that's like always good or by its very nature good. At the very least, we can say this, right? It's sometimes good. Maybe it's often good. At least in economic systems where money is used, is important. So money is something that's good, but we wouldn't want to say, at least intuitively, that it's by its very nature good. Okay. It's good because of what it can bring about, right? So if money couldn't get you resources, whether they be resources that contribute to survival, or resources that contribute to flourishing and enjoying luxuries, right? If money didn't provide us with those resources, then we wouldn't think of money as that significant. It's because money can provide us with those resources that we value the money. We, in some cases, chase after it. So money doesn't have any value in itself. Its value comes from something external to it. Okay, and then just as this very simple model here, oversimplified model here, is money, right? It's the kind of thing that allows us to get resources. I just identified two different kinds of resources: those that contribute to survival and those that contribute to living with luxuries, things that go above and beyond what's required for surviving. But then ultimately, why are these resources significant? Well, because they contribute, you might think, to happiness, right? To people being happy. There's no guarantee, though, right, that money is going to lead to happiness, right? Because money could lead people to gaining resources, but then they use those resources in bad ways, and they end up unhappy, right? In such a case, money would not count as extrinsically good, but extrinsically what? Extrinsically bad, right? Okay. So money can be extrinsically good in the case that it leads to happiness, just supposing, just for argument's sake, that happiness is something that's intrinsically good. But money can also be extrinsically bad in the case when it leads to unhappiness. Again, supposing unhappiness is something that's intrinsically bad. That's why I put the question mark there. I don't want to settle the debate. I'm just trying to give a simplified model to see how this would work. Okay, so on the simple model, money gets its goodness ultimately from the happiness it is instrumental in bringing about. So one of the dominant ways in which something can be extrinsically good is by being instrumentally so. That's by no means exhaustive, but that's a common way in which something could be extrinsically good. So by way of summary, we have these intrinsic goods. Those are non-derivative goods because they're by their nature good. So they don't need to go. They don't need to get any good. They don't need to get goodness from anything external to them. And then the extrinsic goods, we can just understand them. But those are derivative goods. And hopefully the example was helpful. Think about the difference in goodness between money on the one hand and happiness on the other. I mean, imagine someone would say, "What's money good for?" I feel like you could readily come up with an answer to that. Suppose someone says, "What's happiness good for?" You might just say, right? A natural answer would be, "Just is good." Sort of, it's an end state, right? That we would see as intrinsically good in its own right. Okay, you might wonder, like, why think that they're intrinsic goods in the first place? So I just wanted to just briefly motivate why we should think they're intrinsically good things. This is the kind of argument that traces all the way back to at least Aristotle in the history of ethics. So I think there are these intrinsically good things in the first place. I mean, other than just thinking like, well, when I think about happiness, it seems to be intrinsically good. Could we say more than just that it's intuitive that happiness and other things could be intrinsically good, or they seem intrinsically good. So suppose there's no intrinsic goodness. So we run an argument where we suppose, for argument's sake, the opposite of what we're trying to prove in order to show that what we suppose leads to something absurd, namely, in this case, a contradiction. And so then what we suppose we can conclude is false. So in mathematics, sometimes this kind of argument is called like argument by contradiction or proof by contradiction. In logic, we call this a reductio ad absurdum argument, reduction to absurdity argument. So you suppose something, suppose some claim or set of claims, you show that a contradiction results, so you can then reject what you've supposed. So suppose there's no intrinsic goodness. Imagine you're arguing with someone who says there's no such thing as intrinsic goodness. Everything is just extrinsically good. I don't know what's going on. Why I'm getting blown up here. I normally never get text messages during the day, so this must be my lucky day, unlucky day. So if there's no intrinsic goodness, then there's no extrinsic goodness either, because remember, extrinsically good things require intrinsically good things in order to be good in the first place, in order to be extrinsically good. So there's no intrinsic goodness and there's no extrinsic goodness. If there's no intrinsic or extrinsic goodness, then from thinking about this supposition and then what follows from it, then there's no goodness at all, because goodness is exhausted by these two kinds of goods. Either something is going to be intrinsically good or extrinsically good. Those are the two options. Those exhaust logical space. So then we can conclude from our supposition and this first bullet point, and then the second bullet point, this claim, so there's no goodness at all. So the way of thinking about it is this second bullet point, the if part satisfied by the first two, right? And since it's satisfied by the first two, if it's satisfied by the supposition and the first bullet point, then we can drop down the then part. It's a matter of just straightforward logic. And then this, but there is goodness, is kind of like the intuitive claim. It's like, but surely there's goodness. So something had to have gone wrong in the argument. We have a contradiction between the last two bullet points. So then we can reject what we supposed. And we get, so there's intrinsic goodness, just the opposite of what we supposed. So the basic idea is really just this, isn't it? If there's no intrinsic goodness, there's no goodness at all. So insofar as you want to begin with the claim that there is goodness, you need intrinsic goodness. That's a big picture way of understanding what's happening here. If you wanted to, this is the reductio ad absurdum, Latin for reduction to absurdity. If you're interested in checking it out or knowing how it was spelled. Sometimes we just call them reductios for short, but yeah, that's the form of argument. Suppose P, where P is just any claim, you derive from that Q and not Q. That's a logical form of a contradiction, or at least quasi-logical. Q and not Q, therefore not P. That'd be the form of the argument. So here's our P. There's no intrinsic goodness. We derive Q and not Q with these last two bullet points. So then we conclude, guess what? Not P. If you think about it like mathematically, logically, this may help some of you who are a mathematics major or into mathematics, or maybe mathematics minor. I think the vast majority, if not all of you, are Newhouse majors. So, all right. So anyways, that's just, if you were wondering why I think they're intrinsically good things in the first place, this was supposed to motivate their being intrinsically good things. Well, there are different kinds of value theories, as you can imagine. There are monistic value theories. So examples of monistic value theories would be hedonism and desire-satisfactionism, which correspond to the chapters in the fundamentals of ethics. The first two chapters really focus on hedonism, the second two on desire-satisfactionism. And they're monistic in the sense that there's only one thing that's intrinsically good, according to those theories. So think about the MON being related to the mono for one. There's one thing that's intrinsically good. So all goodness ultimately reduces to one thing. So insofar as anything is good, it's either because it's the intrinsically good thing or because it contributes to bring about something that's intrinsically good. So hedonism, you likely already know, is the view that pleasure is the thing, or pleasant experiences are the things that are intrinsically valuable or intrinsically good. So anything that's good has to be ultimately then related to pleasure or having pleasant experiences. And then another monistic theory is desire-satisfactionism. These are distinct theories. Keep in mind, on this view, it's having desire satisfied. That's intrinsically good. Now, conversely, pain, according to the hedonist, is what's intrinsically bad. According to the desire-satisfactionist, having one's desires frustrated is intrinsically bad. Go ahead, Em.
Okay, and just for clarification,
Sure.
so technically wouldn't pleasure in itself be desire satisfactionism? Like, would it, if your desire is satisfied, wouldn't that ultimately bring pleasure?
Well, the desire satisfactionist is often going to say that, yeah, you're going to experience pleasure when you have your desire satisfied. But technically, they're distinct. So the desire satisfactionist thinks that it's possible. Here's what you're thinking about it. Thinks it's possible for someone to not desire pleasant experiences. That's possible. Even though it's very unlikely, even though they're closely related, it's possible that someone just doesn't care about having pleasant experiences. Is that okay?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So the desire satisfactionist often will claim in response to the hedonist that they can explain why pleasant experiences are valuable. They'll claim that pleasant experiences are valuable because we very often desire to have them. Doesn't mean that we necessarily do. So these are just examples of monistic value theories. Okay, and conversely, these are, or relatedly, I should say, these are examples of monistic theories of well-being. So these aren't just theories of what's intrinsically good full stop. These are also theories of what's intrinsically good for us. It's intrinsically good for us to have pleasant experiences if you're a hedonist. It's intrinsically good for us to have our desire satisfied if you're a desire satisfactionist. So you see how one could develop a value theory and a theory of well-being that perfectly overlap in this way. What's intrinsically good is also what's intrinsically good for us. You see? That's a possibility in logical space. Another way that things could go is someone might say, oh, pleasure is what's intrinsically good for us, but there are other things that are intrinsically good, but only extrinsically good for us. Like, so someone might claim that like justice, for example, is intrinsically good, full stop, but it's only extrinsically good for us. Justice is only good for us when it brings about pleasant experiences, you see? That's a possibility in logical space. Okay, that's something like the view, at least last I checked, that Syracuse University, the Syracuse University philosophy chair, Ben Bradley holds. Okay. I've already anticipated this. This is just the hedonistic view. Pleasure is the intrinsic good, pain is the intrinsic bad. Desire-satisfactionism, already anticipated this. And again, sometimes this view you'll see is called desire fulfillment view, or sometimes it's just called the desire theory of value or of well-being. Okay. Now, hedonism and desire-satisfactionism, they're subjectivist theories. Subjectivist theories of value. So what this means roughly is this, what I've captured here on the slide. What's intrinsically good depends on the individual subject, what they take pleasure in. Think about hedonism, what they desire, not think about desire-satisfactionism, or just generally what someone cares about, or what they take interest in, etc. That makes perfect sense, right? I mean, there might be lots of overlap as to what produces pleasure or what creates pleasant experiences, right, in human beings, but well, what someone takes pleasure in is a subjective matter, isn't it? Likewise with having desires satisfied. Depends on the content, right? Depends on what it is that's desired, and that is specific to the desirers, the subjects that have the desires. So hedonistic theories of value, hedonistic theories of well-being, desire satisfaction theories of value and well-being, they're monistic and they're subjectivist. Okay. But keep in mind that monistic theories, they could also be objectivist. And so I just try to capture what it means to be an objectivist. Here's the opposite of what it means to be subjectivist. What's intrinsically good does not depend on the individual subject, what they take pleasure in, what they desire, what they care about. So something can be good, something can be intrinsically good or intrinsically good for us, even if we don't take pleasure in it, or even if no one takes pleasure in it, even if it's not connected to any of our desires, even if no one takes interest in it, even if nobody cares about it. So monistic theories of value could be objectivist, because remember, monistic theories of value are just saying that it's just really an issue of how many things count as intrinsically good or intrinsically good for us, right? So it could be that someone, for example, claims that there's one thing that's intrinsically good for us, virtue, but presumably virtue is something that has an objective component or objective basis, right? The objective standards is what counts as being courageous, for example. Okay. So just some examples of pluralistic theories. So we have the monistic views, but then there's also pluralistic views. So the pluralistic view, surprise, surprise, claim that there's a plurality, of intrinsically good things for us. And the two traditional examples of such theories are objectivist theories and perfectionist theories. Okay. Okay, and these pluralistic theories, these paradigmatic examples, they're also objectivist. Okay, at least traditionally so. So just to to capture objective list theories, like what the nature of such a theory or the nature of such theories is. There's more than one intrinsic good. So remember, the objective list theories are pluralistic, so that drops out here and is captured in this first bullet point. Second bullet point, at least one intrinsic good is an objective good. That's where you get the objective aspect to the objective list theories. So something that's good independent of someone's interest, independent of their caring, independent of their pleasure, independent of their desires, at least one. And then each intrinsic good that's identified is irreducibly fundamental, meaning it doesn't reduce anything else on the list. Maybe another way of putting it is nothing non-trivially unifies what belongs on the list, on the set of things that count as intrinsically good. I say non-trivially because trivially they're united because they're in the set of things that count as intrinsically good. So these theories are called objective list views because they include at least one objective good in them, and nothing non-trivially unifies a set of goods in the theory. That's why they're called list views. So theories are called listy, or they're called, yeah, they're given this sort of this tag of being considered list views because nothing non-trivially unifies, okay, the set of things that belong to the theory. Let me give you an example. That's a bit abstract. So pleasure, suppose someone had such a view: pleasure, happiness, virtue, autonomy, and friendship. They said, oh, each of these things counts as intrinsically good for us, as the case may be. So presumably virtue, autonomy, and friendship, these all have objective components to them. So this is going to be an objective view. It's going to be a pluralistic view because we have more than one thing that counts as intrinsically good. And each of these things that are identified as intrinsically good are irreducible. Doesn't reduce anything else on the list. So pleasure doesn't reduce to happiness, happiness doesn't reduce to pleasure, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and you wouldn't think that virtue, autonomy, and friendship, that these things would like reduce to each other, I think, anyways. Okay, so nothing non-trivially unifies these things. There might be certain thought experiments that the objective list theorist has in mind that lead them to conclude that these things count as intrinsically good. And we'll probably get to some of those thought experiments next time. Roche for Landau discusses them a bit, not in the context of thinking about them as thought experiments, but I'll interpret them in that way. Now, just to round things out here, the perfectionist view, again, is a pluralistic view traditionally. It needn't be, but it traditionally is one. Subjectivist. So this theory traditionally defines a plurality of intrinsic goods. I put traditionally in italics here because in logical space, one could be a perfectionist and identify one thing that's intrinsically good. Just an important note, at least one of the goods is identified as objectively good. So that's why perfectionism is going to be an objectivist view, not a subjectivist one. But in contrast to the objective list theories, perfectionism maintains that the intrinsic goods are non-trivially unified. So there's something that unifies everything on the list. So, if we were to go back to the previous list here, someone could be a perfectionist and identify each of these things as intrinsically good, but they're going to have an account as to what unifies them. And as the label for the theory suggests, what makes something intrinsically good is the fact that it contributes in an essential way to the perfection of human nature. So you see, this is like a robust view of value with substantive claims typically about what human nature involves and how to perfect human nature, or how to improve human nature. Okay, so that I think that rounds things out there, giving you some examples of some of the main, value theories of well-being that are discussed in the literature currently. What we'll do is we'll stop here. We'll begin next time with just some brief critical reflection before we segue back ultimately to the experience machine. So you've been introduced to the experience machine, introduced to just some of the basics in contemporary value theories of well-being. Any questions or comments that I can take in conclusion today? Anything that I could have been clearer about? Okay, let me see what we have here in the chat, and then we'll conclude with that. Yeah, I'll post the lecture slides. I'll post them typically at the end of the week. That way I can edit them and continue adding on them as needed. So it'll be posted by the end of the week. No worries. Okay. So have a great one, and I'll see you all on Thursday. Be in touch if you have any questions. If I can clarify anything for you. Be well, stay warm, be safe. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You take care.